It's a pleasure to be here in Montreal. We've had the privilege of doing these seminars across the country, and this is the first time we've been to Montreal and to Quebec, so it's a great privilege to be here. I always try to warm up the crowd by showing a few slides to kind of suck up to my audience a little bit. I found this one when I was in Vancouver, and so I thought I would customize it a little bit for here, just to make it a little bit more appropriate. So many logos, I suppose the Leafs would have worked as well, but I'm not in the Hockey Hall of Fame. I don't have a lot of academic credentials, but I may be the only speaker here today that has been on the back of Kraft dinner. So that's my criteria. My experience in hockey, I've been there at a number of levels. I was the team physician with the Ottawa Senators for 10 years. I've also worked with minor hockey. I've been a coach, a trainer, a parent, a player, and now I work, as Suzanne mentioned, with the national sledge hockey team, which is just a great group of guys, and I'll put my plug in. If you've never seen sledge or had a chance to watch a game, you should do it because it's an amazing game, amazing athletes. So concussion, let's talk about concussion. That's what we're here for. It's in the news. It's big news, especially in professional sports. You know, in the NHL, not a week or two goes by without another concussion story. In the US, it's football, and it's been very much in the news. This is last week's Sports Illustrated, where they ran a full feature section on concussion, something that wouldn't have seemed possible a few years ago. And if you've been following the news, the NFL has started to fine players for what they deem illegal hits. There's been a lot of controversy about that. We also see it in sports like baseball. This is Justin Morneau, Canadian player with the Twins, who lost the rest of his season after this collision and was concussed. And certainly in Europe, the #1 sport where they have concussion problems is in soccer. So it's not just limited to hockey. While this is a hockey seminar, what we say is generalized to other sports as well. But really, it's not the pro athletes that we're really here to talk about today. We're here to talk about especially the kids. This is of historical significance. I actually grew up on the West Island in Beaconsfield until I was about 10, and this is my first minor hockey picture at Beaconsfield Heights Park. For anybody who might be from Beaconsfield, you can see the equipment's changed a little bit, especially the mouth guards. They're the old outside the mouth guards. It's been a while since we had those. But this is what we're here about. We're here about kids, we're here about amateur athletes, we're here about trying to protect and allow kids and others to play this game safely. So the problem is, through the years, concussion it's been always there. People say, oh, are there more concussions now? It seems like we hear about it more. I don't have any evidence for this, but I would say no. I think they've always been around. It's just that now we start to understand and recognize them more. This is a famous picture where the Rocket was knocked out and returned to score a winning goal in the semifinal game against Boston, and this is a classic picture. And Sugar Jim Henry, the Boston goalie, also was concussed during that game as well. Yet they continued to play, because that's what you do. You suck it up and you keep playing, and that's what we thought that's what athletes do. But as years went by, we started to realize that, this is a problem. We started to see more long-term effects, the cognitive or thinking effects. And so people tried to come to grips with how to manage these. And a number of grading systems, there's like over 100, these are 5 of the more common ones, were developed, which were kind of cookbook. If you're knocked out for 1 minute, you should be managed this way or that way. The problem is that there was absolutely no scientific evidence for any of these. They're all just anecdotal based on people's experience. And some of them were pretty good, and some of them are the basis of what we do today, but there was just no evidence. So there was a need to have something more of a consensus. We're pleased to say that this actually started to a large part in Canada. The Canadian Academy of Sport Medicine developed a position statement back in 2000, which is very similar to some of the guidelines we're using today. And this was happening elsewhere in the world, and eventually there was a meeting held in 2001 in Vienna where concussion, people with expertise and interest in concussion got together and developed guidelines. And the most recent meeting was in Zurich in 2008. And it was sponsored by these groups that you can see here. So powerful sports groups throughout the world. And what we're speaking to you about today comes by and large from this Zurich consensus document. And basically it was published, and I can't remember now, 4 or 6 journals simultaneously, which in the medical world is just unheard of. So it was very important, and this is the basis statement for what we're talking about. Now, the first thing, and believe it or not, a lot of time at the meeting was spent about this, was what exactly is a concussion? You figure we'd know what that concussion is. Well, a surprising amount of time was spent just trying to define what it is. And the Zurich document basically defines it in 3 ways. how it occurs, what happens in a concussion, and what are the symptoms and signs? What sort of effects does it have on the athlete? How does it occur? Well, the most common way is a hit to the head, and a hit to the head can occur in multiple ways in multiple sports. Again, it's not just in hockey, but can also occur to hits to the face. Remember, the head is just not the side of the head or the top of the head. The face is the head, the jaw is the head, and here classically the face is definitely the head. Can also occur, though, when you just get hit really hard. And that's because concussion is not just about the blow to the head, it's about the movement of the brain inside the head. And it's about the twisting and the rotational elements to this. So that's why concussion is so complex. So even a whiplash type of mechanism can lead to concussion. Now, the automobile insurers don't want to hear that, but it's true that many people who've been involved in a motor vehicle accident also will have a concussion just from the whiplash type of effect. So the next question is, well, what exactly happens? We've had this hit. What exactly happens to the brain? And that's where things break down a little bit, because despite all the advances so far, we still don't know exactly what happens inside that brain. This is an old slide I've had for years, and really nobody's come up with anything necessarily better to suggest that there's something going on, there's some sort of biochemical, some sort of change in the brain cells that happens with the trauma. But of course, since we don't know exactly what it is, we can't test for it, and we can't do a test to determine when it's gone either. So something happens, but what happens is a functional injury. It's not a structural injury to the brain. So the way to think about this is, say your brain's a computer. If this guy takes his keyboard and smacks it through his monitor there, we understand why that computer isn't working. It's a structural injury. And so the corollary in the brain would be the white in that MRI is bleeding. So a severe head trauma that causes bleeding to the brain, that's a structural injury. In concussion, this is your brain. This is how your brain is running. Looks okay, but it's not running properly. And so the corollary with imaging is we don't see anything. That's why in a typical concussion, a CT scan or an MRI is not going to show us any damage, because the damage is at a microscopic cellular level. What we do know is it causes multiple signs and symptoms. And this is a rather busy list, but the key thing is to understand that they can be physical, so headache, nausea, dizziness, all the things that Hans was describing so nicely for us. But they can also be cognitive or thinking, trouble with your memory, trouble with concentration, multitasking, focusing. And these are some of the most severe problems that people will have. And they can be emotional. There's very high incidence of depression associated with concussion. We also see moodiness. I've seen some guys who got very paranoid after a concussion. So there are changes, not just the headaches, not just the dizziness. And the one thing, there's a number of take-home points that, if you remember one thing, this is one of the key ones. You don't have to be knocked out to have had a concussion. In fact, most concussions don't involve a loss of consciousness. People who think that they've been knocked out probably weren't. They just don't remember. They have some amnesia. And that being knocked out for a very short period of time, less than a minute, is really no more of a significant symptom than some of the other symptoms that we have. Now, a more prolonged loss of consciousness, we're concerned about a structural injury. But a brief loss of consciousness is not necessarily going to be considered a severe mark as once thought. If I had a dime for every time I had an athlete say, well, I got hit, I was dizzy, I saw stars, I couldn't remember anything for 3 days, I had headaches for 4 months, but I wasn't knocked out, so the doctor told me I didn't have a concussion, I'd be doing this lecture from the Riviera by teleconference, because I've heard that story a lot. What was decided in Zurich, though, was that concussions can have modifiers, things that may make them more severe that you have to watch out for. And these can include how many symptoms you have. More symptoms seems to be correlated with a longer recovery. Again, loss of consciousness greater than a minute. Convulsions, that was a little bit debated. Certainly we see them. Whether or not they are necessarily indicative of a more severe outcome is not yet known, but it's suspicious. Definitely if you're getting concussed more often and with a shorter space between concussions, that tends to have an outcome that can be worse. We have to watch carefully with concussions in kids, and also with anything that pre-existed, like if you already had previous concussions, migraines, any other neurologic problems. Even a dangerous style of play. Certain people expose themselves to a greater risk, and we'll talk more about that in later talks. And obviously some sports are more high risk than others. So these are what we consider concussion modifiers, things that if you have an athlete who gets concussed, we have to make sure we pay even closer attention because they have a higher risk.